Look, if you don't understand Japanese, you have not fully experienced Dragon Ball. That is the brutal reality, and you cannot deny that. Why? Because Dragon Ball was written by a Japanese guy who did not speak English in the 1980s. He was from Aichi Prefecture, and his goal was to create a story that would be a hit with a Japanese audience, specifically Japanese kids. He was not thinking about writing something that would be a hit with a global audience on Toonami and Cartoon Network. So there's a lot of information in the dialogue and in the text of Dragon Ball, and any other anime and manga for that matter, but let's talk about Dragon Ball here because that's what I do. So there's a lot of information in that text and, well, in the vocal performances of the actors that is, at the very least, extremely hard to accurately portray in English, and oftentimes that information gets completely left out. I'm not saying that localization is bad. It's actually necessary and awesome. I would not have been exposed to Dragon Ball and a lot of other anime and manga if it wasn't for localization/translation. It's necessary. But you cannot 100% replicate the experience of consuming something in its source language. It's just impossible. This is not unique to anime. It's something that happens in novels, in movies, in video games. That's just how it is. But that's okay, because I'm here to shed light on some of the things that have been left out of the Dragon Ball dubs and manga translations. Today, I want to talk about why Chi-Chi is, well, the weirdest sounding character in Dragon Ball. Okay, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but if you've only consumed the dub or read the English manga, you may not even be aware of this. So today I'm going to dig really deep into this, explain it from a linguistic perspective, and I even uncovered something that goes all the way back to Dr. Slump. So I've got a lot to break down here. I hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it. Okay, quick refresher just in case you forgot who Chi-Chi was. She was introduced very early on in Dragon Ball, back during the first story arc, during the Emperor Pilaf saga, and she ends up marrying Goku, and of course she is the mother of Gohan. Well, she also happens to have one of the weirdest speech styles in the entire Dragon Ball franchise. She speaks in a pseudo Tohoku dialect. So within Japan, there's tons of different dialects, and even within dialects, there's like sub-varieties. And well, one of the most infamous of these dialects is the Tohoku dialect. The Tohoku dialect, as the name clearly states, is from the Tohoku region of Japan, which is in the northeast area of the main island of Honshu. So north of Tokyo and like on the east coast, just generally speaking. It is a region known to be very rural, and also the weather is quite harsh, especially the winters. They get very, very, very cold. And well, within the Tohoku region, there's multiple varieties of the Tohoku dialect, but generally speaking, the Tohoku dialect is infamous for being quite difficult to understand. In fact, often native Japanese speakers aren't able to understand somebody who speaks really, really, really heavy Tohoku dialect. As I mentioned earlier, Chi-Chi speaks a pseudo Tohoku dialect, so it's not 100% accurate, but it is recognizable as something heavily based on the Tohoku dialect. The first time a native speaker of Japanese hears her speak, they immediately can tell this. And well, even a young kid who may not be able to recognize that this is based on the Tohoku dialect, they would be able to tell like, whoa, this character sounds weird, and maybe she sounds like a country bumpkin. Because, well, here's the first part of the answer to the question, why does Chi-Chi sound so weird? Well, the Tohoku dialect over the years has become associated with a very, well, at this point you could say a negative stereotype that is like the ignorant country bumpkin, or quote unquote hick, someone who comes from, you know, some rural area to the city, doesn't know about city life, and they're in awe of everything. This is being used less and less in media. I don't see it used as much as it once was. I think, again, because it's kind of unfair to portray everybody in this region in this way, because it's not true, right? There's plenty of quote-unquote civilized people that know how to behave, and they're not ignorant about like TVs and computers or anything like that. So to paint everybody with a broad brush is, you know, not fair to them. But this is still something that's in the popular consciousness in Japan because it was such a common trope for, well, probably decades in Japanese media. So yes, Chi-Chi does speak this dialect to some extent because Toriyama probably wanted to portray her as somebody who lived in a rural part of the world, somebody who wasn't from the city, and somebody who sounded, well, different. Let's just say that. But that's not the end of the story. There's a lot more to say here. It gets a lot more interesting from here because here's the thing. The real reason why Chi-Chi speaks in the pseudo-Tohoku dialect is because her dad speaks in the pseudo-Tohoku dialect. So, as you probably remember, her dad is the Ox King, or gyumao as he's known in Japanese. So then why does he speak in this strange way? Because he's also a country bumpkin / quote-unquote hick? Kind of, but here's the thing. Like, he was never portrayed as a character that doesn't know about the world. He was never characterized as an absolute idiot who doesn't know about city life. Goku was portrayed in that way the first time he goes to the city, and well, a lot of other times because he doesn't even know what it means to get married.
Hey, Krillin, what's a bride?
But we never really see this with the Ox King. So there's got to be something more, or at least that's what I thought. So I began to do research into this topic. I started looking in English, and then I started going really deep on the Japanese side. But here's the thing. Pretty much everybody just said, oh, it's probably because, the Tohoku dialect is associated with characters that are from rural parts of Japan or just a country bumpkin type character. And so that's probably why. And then a lot of other places just mentioned that the character spoke in this pseudo Tohoku dialect, but they never really gave a good reason why. And as far as I've been able to tell, I don't think Toriyama has ever explicitly explained this. So if you know of Toriyama ever talking about this, please let me know down in the comments. I would love to know, but I was unable to find this even looking in Japanese. So then I just kept looking and looking and looking because something didn't seem right here. It seemed like there was something more. Like, for example, there's plenty of other characters in the Dragon Ball franchise that are not from the city. They're from remote villages. Even within the Pilaf saga, Goku and the gang stop at least a couple of villages that seem fairly remote, and yet not a single character speaks in this way, right? There's no other characters in the Dragon Ball franchise that I can think of off the top of my head, or, well, from doing a little bit of research online, I didn't see any other mention of any other characters that speak in a Tohoku dialect or in a pseudo Tohoku dialect. So why is it that the Ox King specifically, well, that Toriyama made him speak the Tohoku dialect? I thought there had to be more to this story. And then, well, after a bunch of research and a bunch of Google searches, I came across something that blew my mind. You're probably aware of Dr. Slump. This is the manga that Toriyama created before Dragon Ball. It was an absolute hit, and it resulted in the Dr. Slump anime, which was also a massive hit. It's not really all that important what the show or manga is about, but what is important here is that there's a character in the show, in the story, that speaks Tohoku dialect. His name is Komatta-chan. He's a very large space crab. And by the way, this episode takes place on an alien planet. And Komatta-chan comes from his own planet to this alien planet where Arare-chan is. And he comes once a month. And his goal is to take everybody's daikon radishes. Dr. Slump is a very silly story, very silly manga. So just don't worry too much about the details. Basically, he's this big bully character that comes once a month to steal the radishes or to force everybody to hand over their radishes. And if they're not delicious, he gets angry. And if they don't pay up with the radishes, he gets angry and he picks on everybody. And he speaks in a Tohoku dialect type speech style. So what does this tell us? Well, let's think about this. What does this crazy space crab bully have in common with the Ox King? They are both big characters. They are both portrayed as powerful characters. And they're both portrayed as scary characters. Yes, the Ox King ends up being a good guy, but as we approach the Fry Pan Mountain and they're making their way towards where the Ox King lives, Ulan is making a big deal about how scary the Ox King is. He is afraid that the Ox King is going to kill them. Like, he is portrayed as, well, what his name is, the Demon Ox King. So we can draw some conclusions here about the whole Tohoku dialect thing. The fact that they're both quite similar in their general vibe tells me that to Toriyama, the Tohoku dialect is not simply about being from a rural area. Because, well, let's face it, Komata-chan was never portrayed that way. He was portrayed as coming from a different planet, but it was never about like, oh, he's from the countryside. He's a quote-unquote hick. No, he was a kind of intimidating force. And here's a word that I think could describe both of them in a way, especially how they're portrayed, well, and especially how the Ox King is portrayed at the beginning, brutes, kind of scary brutes. So to Toriyama, yes, there's an element of that, like remote, rural, hick, whatever word you want to use there to describe that. But there's also an element of roughness, of wildness, of just kind of being, you know, a brute, as I said earlier, right? These are both big, kind of scary characters. They're wild men coming in to take radishes or protect their treasure. And so apparently to Toriyama, that is what this kind of Tohoku dialect element added to the character of the Ox King. And well, from that standpoint, yes, it does work well. But reminder, we are talking about stereotypes. Just because somebody speaks a Tohoku dialect, it doesn't mean that they're a big, scary, powerful brute. We're talking about the character archetype that exists within anime and manga. And yes, it's kind of negative, or yeah, it is negative. But that's what is going on here. And on top of that, we have to think about how the Ox King was created, because there was a demon bull king, however you want to translate it, in the original Journey to the West, right? Dragon Ball was based on Journey to the West. And there is a character that is named gyumao. I'm not sure how it's pronounced in Chinese, so apologies for that, but it uses the same kanji. And so probably what happened is that when Toriyama looked at Journey to the West and he said, okay, I guess I got to create a character that is named this. What would he look like? Okay, well, ox or bull, right? Demon bull king. That sounds like a big guy. Okay, I'm going to make him a big scary guy. What would a big scary guy talk like? Oh, okay. Well, I want to give this character a very distinctive speech style to help him stand out. By the way, that's something that manga creators do all the time. Like, characters in anime and manga often have very, let's just say, unrealistic ways of speaking. Like, if you were to speak like one of these anime characters that have very quirky speech styles in real life, people in Japan would look at you just like, what are you doing? It would be very, very strange, and you would have a hard time making friends. But the point is that when Toriyama was looking to give his character a speech style that would be very memorable and help him pop off the page, he decided to give him a very similar speech style to the one that he gave, well, Komata-chan years earlier, because I guess he saw the commonality between the two characters, that they were these both big, kind of scary, powerful, brutish characters. And so he thought, well, I guess the Tohoku Ben style would work for the Ox King. That would convey the nuance that I want to convey with this character. So to finish off, yes, having these characters speak in this kind of pseudo Tohoku dialect does add that countryside, rural, country bumpkin kind of element to it. But it's more than that with the Ox King. It adds that extra element of roughness, of wildness. And in the case of Chi-Chici, having her speak in this way, in my opinion, adds an element of comedy. Because when you see this cute little girl the first time she appears, you don't expect her to speak in this, well, quite frankly, very peculiar way, right? And when you contrast that with her dad, when Toriyama seems to be using this dialect as a way to have him sound kind of scary and wild, and then you put that in the mouth of this tiny, cute little girl, there's a gap there, right? There's a subversion of expectation that results in an element of comedy. Now, when Chi-Chi grows up, I think that she's kind of removed from that. She's not living in Fraipanyama or anything like that. Her dad isn't around as much. You just see her as a mom taking care of her kid. And the feeling that you get is a character that came from, the boonies. She came from some rural area and she wants a better future for her son. So from that perspective, the dialect adds an extra element that I don't think was there early on, but it ends up working in a nice way later on in Z when Chi-Chi becomes the doting mother obsessed with educating Gohan. So what do you think? Did you enjoy this? Do you have other questions about the way characters in Dragon Ball speak? Let me know in the comments. I've got more videos like this coming. Don't forget to subscribe, leave me a like, and I'll see you in the next one.